Thank you, and good morning, thanks first of all to the Bruges Group for inviting me to this session and organising it. The Bruges Group, of course, has for many years carried forward the flame of Mrs. Thatcher's Bruges speech, in which she drew attention to the encroachments of the then European community into wider and wider areas of domestic law and policy. And I suppose the Bruges Group will cease to be needed when we have eventually at some point escaped from the intrusion of European law into our national affairs. That moment has not yet come, and therefore the reason, or the title of my talk today, is Brexit, the Unfinished Business. And it has been the case that a number of rather glib politicians and media commentators have claimed that, oh, Brexit has been done, that's all done and dusted. It has been achieved. Well, that is only partially true. It is true that at the end of the year 2020, we succeeded in removing Great Britain from the scope of directly applying European Union laws. We got it out of the European legal order, we got it out of the European single market. That does not mean that the process of Brexit was completed, because as a result of what must go down in history, of the most disastrous and terrible negotiation of our exit terms, there remain significant areas where we are still bound in to the European Union and its legal order. I'm to run through them in order of importance. In fact, first of all, is probably of equal importance. First, we have retained EU law, and I'll explain what that is in a bit. Secondly, we have the Northern Ireland Protocol, under which European laws and the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice continue to apply to our fellow citizens within the United Kingdom in Northern Ireland. Thirdly, we have rights for European Union citizens in this country. Now, there's nothing wrong with giving them rights, but coupled with that, there is a system under which the European Court of Justice is given jurisdiction to interpret the scope of those rights. Fourthly, we are under obligation to carry on making large payments towards the EU budget. Although they taper off over time, they are completely unjustified as a matter of general international law. But our disastrous negotiators, primarily of the fault of Theresa May, managed to agree to them for no good reason that I can possibly see. And then fifthly, there are a number of other more minor but still significant areas where under the withdrawal agreement we're still subject to European Union laws. A slightly obscure but nonetheless important area is protected designations of origin, where we're obliged to keep the EU system, which is potentially actually a serious problem in creating international trade agreements with non-EU countries. And there are other things like the Cyprus sovereign base areas, which are affected by European Union law obligations still. But what I want to do this morning is just to concentrate on the two most important of these areas where there is unfinished business, because having been gloomy about these for the last 2 to 3 years, at the supine inaction of the government in tackling these problems, I do see cause for hope that the new administration will actually roll up its sleeves and deal with these. Now, let me talk first about retained EU law. And it may seem a highly technical legal subject, indeed it is. And what this comes from is when we left the European legal order at the end of 2020, it simply was not feasible to repeal or replace all in one go the huge existing corpus of European Union-derived laws in our country. And what was done, and I think in principle it was a sensible, indeed necessary step, was simply to keep them in place, but convert them into UK domestic law. So far, so good. That was fine as a temporary measure, necessary as a temporary measure, but on the understanding that then a process would be undertaken under which they would be systematically gone through and replaced. It's not that there is no ease for many areas of European Union law. There is no easy slash and burn exercise that one can do. If we take, for example, financial regulation, we couldn't just go back to our financial regulatory system as it was before it became infected by EU financial services directives, because we'd be going back to a different time when international markets were completely different, when the internet didn't play its part in payment systems, etc., etc. And that's just one example where you can't just slash and burn the EU laws. You actually have to think about it, and you have to put something else in place which is pro-competitive, which works to protect the interests of investors and market participants, but gets rid of the overgrowth of over-regulation and stupidity. And I hope that, again, after 2 to 3 years of lethargic inaction, that this is a process that is now going to get underway. Now, let me explain one of the practical problems of the way EU retained law has been put into our law under the European Union Withdrawal Act of 2018, one of Theresa May's, shall I say, greatest works, or in other words, one of the most disastrous works. What it did, not only did it retain these European Union laws in our legal system, which for a temporary period I think was necessary, it also did crazy things like making European court judgments continue to be binding on our courts on the interpretation of those laws. It made it impossible to repeal or modify those laws for policy reasons, except by Act of Parliament. And if you have thousands and thousands of pages of EU-derived laws and you want to modify and replace them by Acts of Parliament, well, the parliamentary timetable will be stuffed up from here to about 2030. And one of the consequences of this huge body of EU retained law is that for many years, European Union law was a compulsory module in the qualification requirements for barristers and solicitors. It still is today. Today, over 2 years after we've left the European Union legal order, new law students going to university still have to be taught a module on European Union law. Now, I don't criticise the academic authorities and the professional, the Bar Council and the Solicitors Regulation Authority for carrying on insisting on this, because since we have so many thousands and thousands of pages of retained EU law, you do need people trained in the principles of EU law to apply and interpret it. But why should we allow this to continue? To have a completely now alien system of law running in our courts alongside our common law and our own very different statute law based on different principles of interpretation. So what we need here, and I think, I'm hopeful we will see Jacob Rees-Mogg's bill before too long, is we need to have, the most important thing, is a cut-off date, after which all this European Union retained law will be repealed in one fell swoop. And that will incentivise the civil service to actually put their backs into the task of modifying and replacing it. Because at the moment, one of the reasons for the total inaction we've suffered since the end of 2020 has been, I believe, massive civil service, both lethargy and active opposition to removing and changing European Union law. One can be a conspiracy theorist about this and think actually what they're up to is they'd rather like the day when things change, policies change, we go back as a country into the European Union and make their life a lot easier if all the EU laws are still there as before. But it's absolutely essential that there be a cut-off date and that process be got underway. And I think, although it's something I feel qualms about as a matter of principle, there have to be wide-ranging powers to reform and replace that EU-derived law by using statutory instruments. Otherwise, it simply will not be possible to do it in a reasonable timescale. That is absolutely vital to the success of Brexit, because an interesting question I was in here that was a Remain supporter said, well, what tangible benefits can you show from Brexit? And if we go through all the turmoil of getting back our freedom to make our own laws, but then we just keep all the same laws as before, well, it's a very valid question to ask. What tangible benefits have come from it? We've gained our freedom to change our laws, but we seem to have been completely reluctant to make use of that freedom to achieve anything. And it's only by taking advantage of that freedom, replacing European laws with better laws of our own devising, that we can actually get the benefits that we all hope to get from leaving the European Union. And then the next subject, and I'm debating which is equally important, indeed maybe more important from the point of view of the continued existence of the United Kingdom as a single country, is the Northern Ireland Protocol. And I think everyone knows that one effect of that is that it creates a customs border and regulatory checks on trade going east-west across the Irish Sea. And this causes severe practical problems. In my view, although that is extremely important, a very important and very damaging consequence of the protocol, it's not actually the heart of the problem. The heart of the problem is that the protocol provides for the continuation of European Union laws internally inside Northern Ireland. And not only are these and it's actually the way it's constructed legally, it's as if Northern Ireland were still a member state for the purposes of all laws and rules relating to the single market in goods. Not services, they don't have services rules, but everything to do with goods, all the sort of regulatory standards and EU systems, and in addition, customs rules, indirect tax rules, VAT, and so forth. And not only did that perpetuate EU law inside Northern Ireland as of the date where we left the European legal order at the end of 2020, under the protocol, new amendments and replacements to EU laws automatically take effect within Northern Ireland. But the difference between Northern Ireland and a member state is that in a member state, you have some sort of vote in the process. You elect representatives of the European Parliament, who, at least in theory, can oppose things on your behalf, and your government will send the ministers to the Council of Ministers, and citizens of yours will be present on the Commission, and in the Court of Justice. Northern Ireland has all the obligations of a member state, but none of those democratic influence. This is really, I cannot think of any precedent for this sort of extraordinary thing where foreign laws apply to a part of the country. The jurisdiction of the European Court is as if Northern Ireland was still a member state. In other words, it can in effect override the courts of justice in Northern Ireland. Indeed, it could override our Supreme Court if there's an appeal from Northern Ireland, or if there's a matter relating to state aids, which actually the rules apply across the whole of Great Britain too. So I can't think of any sort of historical precedent for this. States simply do not sign treaties under which foreign courts, the courts of the other treaty party, have binding jurisdiction. It's virtually never done. About the closest precedent I can think of are the 19th century treaties with China, where treaty ports were set up under which the Western powers, their laws prevailed in areas of the treaty ports. And indeed there was a body called the Supreme Court for China sitting in Shanghai, which was a British court. And appeals from that court, it had jurisdiction over all matters relating to crimes committed by British citizens in China, and in all dealings between British citizens and Chinese citizens, and appeals went to the Privy Council in London, not to any Chinese courts. And really, that's about the closest you can think of. Now, understandably, it runs at a political level. The Belfast Agreement, or otherwise known informally as the Good Friday Agreement, provided a compromise between the communities in Northern Ireland, under which a critical part of that compromise was an assurance to the unionist community that basically in return for the rights and privileges and extended rights that the nationalist community derived from that agreement, other prohibitions, as it was called in those days, on the movement of goods between Great Britain and Ireland, those provisions of the Act of Union had been subjugated by the will of Parliament in the 2020 European Union Withdrawal Agreement Act. In my view, that was the right legal result, but what it points up to is the constitutional outrage that was committed when the Northern Ireland Protocol was put into law. What I can understand, there are reasons why it is said there was a dire necessity to agree to this imperfect agreement in order to get out of the bind created by the Benn Act and the Benn Speaker of the House of Commons, blocking the implementation of the referendum result. What I fail to see is the lethargy, reasons for the lethargy of the government from early 2020 onwards in not trying to undo the Northern Ireland Protocol. And I'm very pleased that early this year, Liz Truss, as Foreign Secretary, put forward a bill which would be effective to restore sovereignty over Northern Ireland as part of the United Kingdom. Obviously, what happens now to that bill, I'm not a crystal ball gazer, I'm very much hoping that it will go through and become law, because personally I can't see, I have extreme difficulty in seeing any realistic prospect that the European Union will negotiate by agreement an acceptable outcome, unless and until they're faced with facts on the ground in the form of that bill. So those, in my view, are the two big issues in getting Brexit done. I stand here today, I suppose, with more hope than I would have done 6 months ago, where things were running into the ground, nothing was happening. But there are bumps ahead in the road, so it is hope with some trepidation as to whether or not we're going to be able to get these very important bits of unfinished business finished. So thank you very much for listening, and I'm very happy to engage in a discussion on anything anyone wants to ask on these subjects or other subjects for that matter.
One question. How do we reconcile the urgent need to leave the ECHR with the Good Friday Agreement and the rewriting of the Good Friday Agreement, which it seems unnecessary to facilitate? And how can we do that constantly to ensure smooth transition to people in Northern Ireland?
The ECHR is another issue, which thank you for raising. It's been, obviously, as you know, it's not a European Union issue. The European Convention on Human Rights comes under the Council of Europe, which is a wider body that includes all the EU member states, but includes, I can't even remember now, 20 or more other states which are outside the European Union. Leaving the European Union did not get us out of the European Court of Human Rights. My view on that subject is that the European Convention itself, as a text, and if properly interpreted, is not really objectionable. It contains a series of rights which would probably be universally accepted across the political spectrum as being basic rights that should be protected. The problem has been we have had decades of so-called interpretation of the Convention by the Court of Human Rights at Strasbourg. And unfortunately, I'm afraid one of my absolute hates in life is political judges who abuse the powers and responsibilities of their judicial office by not applying the rules that they're meant to be applying, but by thinking they can do better and applying rules and doctrines of their own devising because they think they're so much wiser and better at doing these things than the legislative body which made the rules. And of course the problems of this are manifold, both at the practical level. We saw the flights of the so-called asylums, people claiming to be asylum seekers, to Rwanda being stopped at the last minute by an action by the Strasbourg court that is completely outside the powers conferred on that court by the Convention. There is no power under the Convention whatever for that court to pass so-called interim orders or injunctions that bind member states. The Convention is explicit that it is only final judgments of the court that are binding on the member states. And it seems that that court simply disregards the limits on its own jurisdiction, which is itself concerning enough. What is more concerning is the way we have, as a country, flaccidly lain down in front of these gross abuses of power by this court over the years. So, I agree with the subtext of your question, which I think it will be a good idea to remove ourselves from the Convention. The Belfast Agreement, as you point out, contains provisions which in effect require remedies to breach of the Convention to be given to people within Northern Ireland. I think there is a way around that, which is to, if you like, keep the Convention as part of our law and provide for the remedies. But I fear that this will have to be a matter, if it's addressed, to be addressed not this side of the next general election. the present newly installed Prime Minister has enough to do on trying to get the economy back functioning, enough controversial things to do, which is why the rather half-baked bill that Dominic Raab put forward, as I understand, been kicked into the long grass. Any more?
Hi, I'm Colin Forsyth from Northern Ireland Conservatives. Two questions really. First one's connected to that one. As the UK begins to change those EU laws, how many of those will be allowed to apply to Northern Ireland directly, or will we have to ask for permission? There was something yesterday about GDPR being changed for British things. Will we be stuck to the European GDPR, or will we be allowed to change?
Okay, let me answer.
Sorry, before you want this, the second question. Probably, there was a couple of journalists last night on Twitter speculating that the EU and UK have done a deal on the protocol. With respect to journalists, Lisa Carroll from The Guardian and Ben Lowry from News Letter both sharing, so it's not a random rumour. But they're not announcing the deal until the end of the conference next week. Have you heard anything about that?
I don't. Dealing with your third question first, I have heard, whether rightly or wrongly, that those rumours are not correct. However, I don't. You never know. I was concerned by the way certain ministers started apologising to the Irish Republic, when, in my view, no apology to the Irish Republic is required, given that their enthusiastic support of the protocol, and particularly for radicals deliberately sabotaging what could have been much better and less sovereignty intrusive measures to control the flow of goods across the Irish land border by cooperation. And I fear that people seem to think that if you're nice to the European Union, they'll be nice back. They never are. Never. They just regard being nice to them as a sign of weakness. And they, they just take whatever you proffer and give nothing back. So I fear if there's a deal done with the European Union soon on the protocol, my prediction is it will be a rubbish deal and a sellout, I'm afraid. So I'm just hoping that this mood music stuff disappears and a bit of reality intrudes. Your second point, the GDPR. Now, I don't think the GDPR is specified as applying to Northern Ireland within the protocol.
Is there a GDPR, just an example?
Yeah, but I think that's outside it. There's about 50 pages of measures that are listed do apply. I'd have to double check that on the text of the protocol. But your more broader point is a very valid point. And of course, the first, and indeed you're pointing out in a way something that flows from the first half of what I talked about, which then impacts on the second part of the protocol. Because as we change European Union laws in Great Britain, replace them, of course, as long as the protocol exists, those laws that are within the scope of the protocol can't be changed to follow. So we have a scenario where Northern Ireland is stuck behind. And this isn't just, people seem to think that these single market goods laws are just sort of boring widget regulations that don't affect anyone. But they're not. There's a huge range of measures, including vital things like medicines control. So we will end up with, or we will have at the moment, there are sort of grace periods which are functioning. But with the protocol fully effective, we would have a scenario where, to take, say, medicines, there would be medicines which are authorised for use by the UK HRA, but can only be dispensed in Great Britain to patients in Great Britain, are not available to patients in Northern Ireland. And we have seen, actually I do a fair amount of, to be fair, UK MHRA has been speeding up its processes. So we'll get a divert, as long as the protocol is there and is not overridden by the bill when it comes into force, we will get increasing divergence in which people in Northern Ireland will not have available to them many of the benefits of Brexit which people in Great Britain will have. And I've always viewed this as fundamentally a constitutional issue, and indeed, the whole concept of the protocol of allowing part of our country to be governed by foreign laws is absolutely anathema, absolutely disgusting in my view. People in Northern Ireland have no means of democratic input to those laws, whether they vote for the Northern Irish Assembly or they vote for Westminster. Simply no way.
Any other questions, ladies and gentlemen?
Is there a time frame, you think, in order to go through all the European law that currently we have and to sort it out?
Well, it has been, it has been said that it would be. I've seen various accounts in the media. There has been said they were talking about 3 or 4 years away, which of course put it all on the far side of general election. It has been said they will bring it forward in the Quasi-Quante. We've taken his speech announcing the mini budget. I think said within 2 years.
Does it seem viable, or is it more just?
It's a lot of work. There is a danger in compressing the timetable too much, which is the tick box effect.
Yeah.
Because it's a lot easier to say, well, let's just have UK laws and we'll just basically copy out the EU laws without changing much and tick the box.
That's my concern. If they try and rush it through, they're not going to do the job properly. So, yeah. Yeah, but there are other benefits though, even so. Quite frankly, even if you, although it would be imperfect, if you ended up with a lot of UK laws that were the same as in substance as the EU laws they replace, then let's assume that happens because of the rush process, you do get a benefit in getting rid of the different methods of interpretation of different texts that need to refer to European Court decisions. And another consequence of that is it will then be possible for the professional bodies to remove European law as a compulsory module from the professional qualifications requirements of barristers and solicitors. If we don't do this, well, my prediction is in 35 years' time it'll still be there.
Ladies and gentlemen, any other questions? Well, I'd just like to say thank you very much to Martin Howe KC, distinguished barrister, expert on European Union law. He's given us an absolutely superb masterclass in Brexit, the unfinished business and what needs to be done and is absolutely necessary if we are indeed to fulfil the benefits of Brexit and to become a proper United Kingdom once again that's democratic and indeed prosperous and one that we voted for in 2016. So, ladies and gentlemen, please give a big round of applause to Martin Howe.